Thank you all so much for being here. Andrew's going to talk after I do about his dad. If you don't know who I am, my name's Nathan. I'm Ajay's nephew and have a lot of really fond memories. And for folks that don't know, so professionally, I'm a United Methodist minister. And several years ago, fresh out of seminary, I was sent to a church in Katy, a pretty big church there in Katy. And those of you from the Houston area know the Katy area is full of people that work in oil and gas. And so one of my first Sundays, one of the first times I preached, Shatapa and Ajay came to support me and to see me in the service. And a couple of different folks, including Sean, who's here today, from the church over the next few months. Is Ajay Badachhape your uncle? The folks that knew him from the industry here in town and had just the nicest things to say about him. And a consistent thing that I'm sure all of you know is my uncle was so incredibly good at staying connected to people that he met over the years. Being intentional, whether it was friends on Facebook or family in India or whatever it was, in making sure that he stayed connected to the people that he met through work, through school, through life, and would love to, send you an email with a corny joke that he thought was really funny or whatever it was to stay connected to folks. And my memories of him when I was a kid are about how much he loved to share in people's curiosity and wonder about things. So when we were little, we'd go over to their house and he would take us into the room that was clearly a very special place where he had these different display cases of rocks and geodes and minerals from all over the world. And anything that you were interested in that case, no matter how fragile it might be or rare it might be, if you looked at it, he would pull it down and show it to you and tell you where it was from and what made it have this particular color or that particular thing, or this one you've really got to take over and hold under the black light because you won't imagine what it does when you do that. And he'd also, at night, have you look through the telescope and look at things in the stars with you. But the other thing was he always wanted to hear about what you were interested in. He had these deep passions for minerals and for stars and things, but he also wanted to hear about what you were curious about and connect with you about that. And I always really found that to be meaningful. So in there on the board that's got pictures is a picture of him in the kitchen with me as probably a 13 or 14-year-old, and Andrew, or maybe a little younger than that, and Andrew and my sister Grace are all around the table in the kitchen. And unlike other Badachhapes, I never went much into science. So the scientific realm where I spent the most time as I got older especially was food, because like a Badachhape, food is an outsized part of my way of dealing with the world and life. And so it became the place where we were able to connect and talk about things that we were both interested in was the kitchen. And I remember lots of memories of talking about cooking and talking about what made knives good, sharp knives, and how to keep stuff taken care of, and recipes and things, and sharing time around the table in the kitchen. And that was really special to me, and something I will cherish forever. So I was talking to my mom about her little brother today, or yesterday. Days are hard to remember these days. And she talked about how a little while back she had asked him what his first memory of her was, and then talked about her first memory of him. And his first memory of her, she contends, was too early for it to be a memory. It must be a story that he was told. But when he was a toddler, she pushed him onto a hot stove. And her first memory of him was chasing her around and threw an aerosol can at her and gave her a scar that she still has. Which is particularly funny because I think that if I tried to come up with a list of the most gentle people I know, my mother and my uncle would be near the top of the list. So very uncharacteristic stories, because so much of their life was not like that at all, but their early memories were. And as his health started to get worse, my grandmother talked about this when we sat around right after he passed away. He'd talk about that if you made him, but what he wanted to check on was you. My wife had knee surgery a little while back, and several of the times we've talked since, well, how's Sarah's knee doing? And how's your stuff? And how's her family doing? Or when my grandmother would be ill, even as he was battling some really serious stuff at the end, he was most concerned with hearing about how the people he cared about were doing. If you haven't been on the webpage that the funeral home here has that has the obituary on it, my Aunt Shatapa wrote a tribute to my Uncle Ajay called Stargazer that is just, it's really worth your time to read and to look at. and she talks about how deep his love for all of the universe was, and all of the natural world and the stars, and that he turned his attention from space into the ground. And I'm a person, as a Christian pastor, for whom questions about life eternal are a pretty significant part of my job and what I do and what I think about. And it's meaningful to me that something that really mattered to my uncle was, what are the cosmos? And so as we look at rocks and stones and minerals and things, or as we talk about people, and he's this deep thinking person, I take a lot of hope and solace in this idea that at some level, whether we're talking about ideas of reincarnation, the kind of ideas of life eternal that Christians talk about, or even things that more secular folks who are very scientifically minded think about, at some level, we're all stardust. The things that make our body what we're made out of is the stuff of the cosmos, is the giant creation, and at some point, that which we are physically made of will be used again to create new life and new things. That's an incredibly beautiful thing, but the part of us that is not material, our imagination and our spark, is something that I'm just so grateful to have had an uncle who used his life to show people that he cared, to care deeply about the world around him, and I'll miss him a lot.
I'd like to start off by thanking everyone for coming here today. Can everyone hear me?
Yes.
I think when I look around at everyone, the thing that comes to mind first is probably the best part about my dad. It's how deeply he cared for so many people in his life. He made many friends through work, from his early days, from college, and he kept up with them. He kept up with almost every single one of them. He cared about them deeply. He cared about developments in their life. And I think above all else, he felt their pain. He felt things that happened to them. He felt loss for them. He also felt love for them. Great things that happened, bad things, he was there for them. So I want to start off by thanking all of you very much for being here, because I think that in itself is probably the best tribute that I can make to my father, is all these people here and being able to share together in our collective grief. Dad wanted to be an astronaut. He loved looking at the stars, loved looking at the sky, and he loved to go fast. He loved to drive. That's probably one of his favorite things, was getting in his car and driving. Didn't matter where, didn't matter how far. It's probably one of the biggest things that I share with him. We both love to drive. But why did a man who made his career looking at rocks, thinking about geological processes, why was he so fascinated with the stars and the sky? Why did he like to go fast? I think it was a sense of freedom. A man who dealt with health issues, allergies, asthma, and then later on in life, eventually just various different illnesses. But through it all, he wanted to be able to fly. He wanted freedom. He wanted to be able to see the stars and explore. And even with all of those things standing in his way, he did. He explored 6 continents. He had a career that spanned decades. He did so many things with his career that, honestly, I hope that someday I can try to emulate. He met many people, and while he met so many of these friends that I spoke about, he explored the world. And that, I think, was one of the greatest passions that he had. Inside, we have several rocks and minerals, things that he collected throughout his travels, things that are important to him. And they're important because these rocks tell a story. They're ancient, and they speak for ages and timescales that we cannot even imagine in the timescale that they have. And in many ways, that was his spirituality. That was his way of being able to explore the world and being able to just be free, by being able to look at these rocks, these beautiful creations and minerals, and be able to look at them and just feel and think about the scale and how much time it took to be created. And I think that was, at the end of the day, what allowed him to think about his illnesses and his limitations and be free. because he was able to explore the world in so many different ways just by holding such a simple thing as a rock. When I was in 4th grade, and I'm really happy that Reese Thompson, one of our friends from elementary school, is here. My dad took his mineral collection to my elementary school, and he presented them to everyone there. Now, when he retells the story, he's going to say ruefully that all the 9 and 10-year-olds were more interested in his green laser pointer than the rocks that he had that were there. But afterwards, Reese and several of my other friends stayed after, and they talked with him about his collection. They learned about it. Reese is a geologist now. You can talk with him more about his career. And Dad was always so proud of you for being able to do that, Reese, for going and following in his footsteps. But it wasn't just that you followed his career path. The big thing for my dad was that he inspired someone else to think about the natural world and think about science and be passionate about it at such a young age. That was another way that he tried to maintain connections and tried to forge bonds with other people. It was powerful. I didn't follow my dad's footsteps and become a geologist or a geophysicist. I instead wanted to look inside. I wanted to look at the human brain. I wanted to look at what was wrong with us. What are these horrible conditions that we have to fight, and I tried to understand them better. Even though I was in such a different field though, my dad shaped my career as well. He inspired my love for science. He inspired my love for engineering. But more than anything else, probably more than anything else, he tried his best to help me every single day as I tried to become a better scientist. Even though we studied such different subject matters, he read my dissertation, and he's the reason that the equations that I wrote and the derivations are as clean and as thorough as they are, because he wrote that section, because that was the part that he understood. Math is universal language for scientists, being able to explain and describe things that are concrete and real. Again, things and subjects that are very important to my father, why he loved rocks and why he loved geology. These are tangible things to him. And math and the derivations that he worked on for my dissertation were important for me. Probably the other most amazing thing is, as a scholar, he was able to pick up on so many topics in different fields like mine so quickly. During my PhD defense, he asked such probing questions at the end of my defense that my advisors thought he was in the field, or that I'd give him the question ahead of time to make myself look good. And he did make me look good, because he worked so hard. He cared about my education, he cared about my training, he cared about everything that would make me who I am. He was an amazing father. He was an amazing friend, as many of you all know. And I think the hardest thing for me, honestly, going forward is going to be thinking about all the things that he gave me and try to enjoy the things that we enjoyed together. But I will. His memory will give me strength. I will remember forever his compassion, his humility, and his ability to understand and empathize with everyone. Thank you all so much for coming out today.